They didn't have fast food drive-thrus. They didn't have packaged microwave meals, and they certainly didn't have food delivery apps. What they did have were full hearts, busy kitchens, and an unshakable gift for turning modest ingredients into meals that fed families and delighted children. In the 1960s, African-American mothers invented or perfected dishes that were cheap to make, plentiful, and so delicious that kids begged for seconds. These meals weren't about luxury, they were about creativity, community, survival, and flavor. This is The Lost Taste, and today we're revisiting 15 cheap dishes African-American mothers made that 1960s kids loved. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another trip through culinary history. Let's honor the kitchens that raised us. Macaroni and cheese from scratch. Long before boxes of powdered cheese and processed mixes, mac and cheese was made from scratch with elbow macaroni, a modest amount of cheddar or American cheese, milk, and seasonings like black pepper and a touch of mustard powder if eggs were available. Mothers learned that thinning the sauce just enough so that it clung to every noodle created a creamy, comforting dish kids called cheesy elbows. A pound of pasta could feed a whole family, and the leftover sauce was often stirred back into the pot, ensuring nothing went to waste. This humble casserole was cheap. Pasta and cheese were inexpensive staples, but it was rich in texture and love. Grandmothers often set the record for how much cheese was just enough, making every bite memorable for the generation that grew up around kitchen tables. Hot water cornbread. This simple concoction was a breakfast staple and an indispensable side dish. With no eggs, no milk, and no shortening to spare, cornmeal was mixed with boiling water and a pinch of salt to form a dough that was then fried in bacon grease or inexpensive cooking oil. The quick gelatinizing effect of the hot water gave the cornbread a soft inside and a crisp outside, making it irresistible to kids who loved the crunchy edges. Grandmothers proudly served hot water cornbread alongside bowls of collard greens or beans, turning basic cornmeal into something warm, filling, and deeply satisfying. It wasn't fancy, but it was dependable, and for children of that era, it became comfort food. Beans and rice. If there was one combo that defined cheap, nutritious, and beloved dinners, it was beans and rice. Pinto beans, black-eyed peas, or navy beans were simmered with onion, garlic, and a piece of salt pork or ham bone for flavor. Once cooked until soft and creamy, they were ladled over bowls of fluffy white rice. Children grew up loving the way the beans soaked into the rice, and the occasional savory bite of meat turned a simple pot into a feast. Beans and rice delivered fiber, protein, and calories for pennies a serving. Mothers liked it because bulk ingredients fed the whole family. Kids loved it because it was hearty, flavorful, and perfect for big appetites after long days of play or school. Spaghetti with simple tomato sauce and a dash of sugar. Before Italian restaurants became mainstream, many African-American households served their own version of spaghetti. It wasn't elaborate, just boiled noodles topped with a tomato sauce made from canned tomatoes, a sautéed onion, a dash of garlic powder or fresh garlic if available, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acidity. Sometimes bits of ground beef or sliced hot dogs were added to stretch the protein. Kids loved twirling the noodles and slurping up sauce, and mothers loved how cheap and quick it was to make. A can of tomatoes, a pound of pasta, and a handful of spices turned into an instant favorite around the dinner table. Fried bologna sandwiches. Bologna was affordable processed lunch meat, and frying it in a skillet until the edges crisped up turned it into something extraordinary. Slapped between white bread with mustard or ketchup, fried bologna became a lunchtime favorite for kids in the 1960s. Its salty, almost smoky flavor and satisfying crisp edges made it feel like a treat, not just a cheap meal. Mothers appreciated that bologna was cheap, didn't require marinating, and made mouths happy with minimal effort. In many kitchens, the sizzle of bologna in a hot skillet was its own kind of music. Rice pudding, nothing went to waste, and leftover rice found new life in dessert bowls. Rice pudding was made by simmering cooked rice with water or milk, sugar, a pinch of salt, and cinnamon or vanilla if available. Sometimes raisins were added for texture and sweetness. The result was a creamy, warm dessert that could be served after dinner or as a midday snack. Children loved its sweet simplicity and soft texture, and mothers liked how it turned leftover staples into something kids looked forward to. In a time when boxed desserts were luxuries, rice pudding was love in a bowl. Potato hash with onions and fatback. Potatoes were cheap, abundant, and versatile. Dice them up, fry them with onions, and throw in scraps of fatback or bacon grease, and you had a golden, crispy hash. Kids loved the crispy, seasoned edges and the hearty chew of the potatoes. Served with eggs for breakfast or cornbread for dinner, potato hash became a go-to meal that filled bellies on a shoestring budget. Mothers would tell stories of how a bag of potatoes could last all week if sliced thin and cooked with care. Cabbage slaw with vinegar dressing. Cabbage was affordable, filling, and could be stored for weeks. Shredded cabbage tossed with a simple dressing made from vinegar, a little sugar, salt and pepper offered a crunchy, tangy side dish that paired perfectly with fried chicken or hot dogs. Kids loved the crunch and the bright flavor, and parents loved how cabbage stretched meals further, adding volume and nutrition without stretching the grocery budget. In many families, slaw was washed in cold water and eaten plain as a snack before it ever hit the table with dinner. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches. Peanut butter was affordable protein, and bananas were often cheap or impermanent fixtures in the fruit bowl. Slather peanut butter on bread, add sliced bananas, drizzle a little honey, or sprinkle some cinnamon, and you had a sweet, satisfying sandwich that kids adored. It was portable, nutritious, and comforting. Mothers appreciated that it was a meal that required no cooking and used pantry staples kids already loved. Sometimes it was served with cold milk after school. Other times it was packed into lunch boxes with pride. Monday night meatloaf. In many kitchens, Monday was meatloaf night. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, often made from leftover or stale bread. Diced onions, an egg if there was one, and seasonings. Packed into a loaf pan and baked until fragrant, it stretched that pound of meat across hungry mouths. A thin glaze of ketchup or tomato sauce on top made the edges sticky and sweet. Kids loved the soft interior and tangy topping, and mothers loved that a small amount of meat could be transformed into a big, satisfying dinner. Leftovers made excellent sandwiches the next day. Cornmeal mush and gravy. Cornmeal boiled into a thick porridge, then cooled into a loaf and sliced, was fried until the exterior turned crisp while the interior stayed soft. Served with savory gravy made from pan drippings and flour, this dish felt rich and indulgent despite being inexpensive. Children adored the contrast in textures, crunchy outside, silky inside, and mothers appreciated how inexpensive cornmeal could be elevated into a centerpiece. This was comfort food perfected. Cheap, warm, and endlessly adaptable. Sweet potato biscuits. Sweet potatoes were cheap and nutritious, and mashing them into biscuit dough added moisture and sweetness that made these biscuits tender and flavorful without much fat. Baked until golden, these became breakfast favorites with butter or honey drizzled on top. Kids loved the mild sweetness and soft crumb, and mothers loved how far a few simple ingredients could go. Sweet potato biscuits were often made in batches and stored, ready for a quick meal at any time. Egg drop soup with greens. When leftover greens from dinner hung around into the next day, a pot of broth with greens could be transformed into egg drop soup. As the broth simmered, a beaten egg was drizzled in, creating silky ribbons of egg that warmed the soup. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of salt added brightness. This inexpensive soup was nourishing and satisfying, and kids loved the soft texture of the egg ribbons. Mothers saw it as a way to stretch leftovers into an entirely new meal. Oatmeal with brown sugar and molasses. Oatmeal was cheap, filling, and infinitely adaptable. Cooked with water, a pinch of salt, and served hot with brown sugar or a drizzle of molasses, it became a meal that could be eaten for breakfast or even dessert. Kids loved its sweet, warm embrace on cold mornings. Mothers loved how inexpensive oats could fill up an entire family and keep them satisfied until the next meal. A little molasses added depth and richness without the cost of butter or cream. Banana fritters. Overripe bananas weren't thrown out. They were mashed and mixed with a simple batter of flour and a touch of sugar, then fried until golden brown. Sometimes a dusting of powdered sugar or a light drizzle of syrup turned them into a special treat. Kids begged for banana fritters because they were crispy on the outside and sweet inside. Mothers liked that they transformed fruit that might have rotted into something delightful and memorable. As you can see, every dish on this list wasn't just cheap. It was inventive, intentional, and full of heart. These meals showed young people that food could be comforting and delicious without being expensive. They taught lessons about resourcefulness, sustainability, and the joy of shared meals. These dishes were shaped by the times, a world where grocery budgets were tight, but kitchens were ruled by creativity. When vegetables were fresh and cheap, they hit the table every night. When meat was scarce, it was stretched with grains and fillers, so nobody went hungry. When desserts were a whim, leftovers became sweet surprises, and through it all, children grew up with fond memories of food that tasted like home. Now it's your turn. Which of these dishes would you make today? Which one reminds you of your grandmother's kitchen? Drop a comment and share your story. We want to hear how these meals lived in your family. And if you learned something new, hit that like button and subscribe to The Lost Taste for more forgotten flavors and heritage stories. Food is not just nourishment. It's history, identity, culture, and love served on a plate. On The Lost Taste, we honor every bite and every memory. Stay hungry for history, and we'll see you in the next video.